For those of us here at PSRC, roll call is by sign-in sheet, so make sure you get signed in. And we're expecting a number of board members to participate in today's meeting by phone. So I'm going to call the names of the folks we're expecting on the phone, and if you can just let me know if you're there or not, that'd be great. Councilmember Claudia Balducci. Councilmember Ed Prince. Mayor, we're not hearing anything, so no response. Mayor Amy Okerlander.
I'm here.
Excellent. Good morning, Mayor. Councilmember Chris Roberts.
I'm here.
Good morning, Councilman. Councilmember Rick Talbert.
I'm here, Dave.
Good morning. Mayor Ron Lucas.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Councilmember Terry Ryan.
I'm here.
Morning, Terry. Councilmember Stephanie Wright.
Good morning.
Good morning, Stephanie. Councilmember Barbara Tolbert.
Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Barbara. And Councilmember Brian Wall. Are there any other members on the phone that I've missed? All right. Okay, we'll move on to communications and public comment. And do we have sign up? Okay, each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak. We have an on-screen timer, so you'll be able to see how much time is remaining, and we discourage people from using obscenities and personal attacks. In fact, we not only discourage it, we don't allow it. So please be mindful of that as you're giving public comment today. Alex Zimmerman.
One moment, Mr. Zimmerman. One moment, please.
Oh, there we go. All right.
Heil, my dirty WF Führer, a Nazi social democratic mafia with progressive Gestapo principle. My name Alex Zimmerman, I'm president of Stand Up America. Sorry guys, every time as I come to this place, and I come every meeting for the last couple of years, I call you natural born degenerate idiot. I'm so sorry. You're more dangerous than degenerate idiot. You're a mafia, a criminal, a bandita. More dangerous than Nazi communist, no question. So, each time you approve this every day. So right now I want to speak about something that is absolutely unique. I'm candidate for you, for U.S. Senator 2018. In Kitsap County auditor cut my statement by 33 words. It's a 12%. You understand what's going on? Why he did this? He's pure freaking idiot? No. He part of not touchable mafia because you all absolutely identical. You can do in everything with us and nobody from you go to jail. Yeah, I will sue him. It's not a point. He not care about this too, like you all about this. So situation right now very simple. Guy, why you start acting this? Why you move from 3 minutes to 2 minutes? Why you talking about personal attack? Are you because Alex Zimmerman come and you did this because one man did this? You represent 4 million people. 4 million people and you absolutely identical. A criminal, a bandita. Annual report shows this. Everybody have same opinion. Represent 4 million people. How is this possible? This is what has happened for the last 30 years. So not surprise me right now. So King Country Council and Seattle Council have rating right now 20% less than this idiot George Bush. It's exactly who you are, a bandito. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, Paul Locke.
I'm Paul Dialog. My income has been dropped. I'm down to 1/2 of 1% return on my money in the bank accounts, which I depend upon to pay my bills. I am using up my assets like a lot of other people. We cannot afford the cost of government. I heard another government project was far over budget. You got to change course. People who are still paying for this government can no longer afford it. Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to President's remarks. I don't really have much. I just want to thank those of you that are here and also on the phone. We have a pretty full agenda today. We have 2 items of new business and 2 discussion items, and we do have. Pardon? Introductions around. Oh, all right. Sorry about that. We will do introductions around the room so everybody on the phone also knows who's here. And Bruce, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Bruce Dammeier, the Pierce County Executive.
Sheila Rogers, PSRC staff.
Diana Lauterbach, PSRC staff.
Becky Erickson, Mayor, City of Paulsbo, representing Kitsap Other Cities.
Glenn Bachman, Commissioner, Port of Everett.
Hester Sarabrin, Washington State Transportation Commission.
Victoria Woodards, Mayor of Tacoma.
Nancy Backus, Mayor of Auburn.
Dennis Higgins, Council Member, City of Kent.
Kathy Lambert, King County Council.
Josh Brown, PSRC Executive Director.
Bruce Bassett, Mercer Island City Council, representing Sound Cities Association.
That was a long gap from over there to here. Catherine Stanford, Deputy Mayor, City of Lake Forest Park, representing Sound Cities Association.
Rob Johnson, City of Seattle, and PSRC Transportation Policy Board Chair.
Roger Miller, Washington State DOT.
And Dave Summers, Snohomish County. So thank you all. We do have a quorum. So I'll turn it over to Josh for the director's report.
All right, excellent. Well, it's hard to believe it was a month ago we had our General Assembly meeting. You know, I know how busy everybody is, but I think it's an opportune time to just reflect on really the amazing turnout that we had at the General Assembly. I think if we didn't have a near record turnout, we're maybe a couple people away. We had about 200 folks that were at the General Assembly. We adopted our regional transportation plan. Congratulations to Councilmember Johnson and Mayor Erickson for your amazing leadership on that effort. We adopted our supplemental budget and work program, re-elected Executives Summers and Dammeier to leadership with our organization. But I think, like all of you, the highlight, even with all those wonderful things, was our women's mayors panel, which was just amazing. Mayor Erickson, you knocked it out of the park. Oprah has competition. You just did a phenomenal job. Mayor Woodards, thank you so much. And of course, Mayor Durkin and Mayor Franklin. It was really amazing. And I think that photo that we took at the end of all of our women elected officials at the General Assembly, that's one that many of us are going to keep for a very long time. So just thank you for all your great work. I thought it was a wonderful reflection of the region's leadership. We're certainly in good hands, so thanks for all that you do. A couple highlights on PSRC business. First, you'll see a couple data trends at your table. One was from last month, our housing affordability trend. Of course, these are things that you all are paying attention to every day. Among the 50 largest U.S. metro areas, the Central Puget Sound region experienced the 3rd fastest increase in home prices and the 6th fastest increases in rents over the past year. Of course, there's been some recent coverage about how the rental market is beginning to flatten out with an enormous amount of apartments that have been coming online in the region. So that was a fresh data point from May that we're presenting to you. And then, of course, just from a couple weeks ago, we had our latest transit boarding growth for the region where, again, Central Puget Sound continues to perform at just at a historic clip in terms of the growth of transit ridership. You'll see that for this past year, the Phoenix metropolitan area actually had some amazing performance as well, whereas many of the other regions in the country have seen continued declining. In Phoenix, in 2015, they actually passed a very large transit ballot measure. So a lot of their growth is new services coming online from that ballot measure. So just some data that we've been reporting in my emails and blogging about and putting on our website, but just wanted to make sure you all had some hard copies. Shifting gears to a lot of the work that we do at PSRC supporting jobs and our region's economy. You're going to get a presentation later today at the Executive Board meeting on our Aerospace Competitive Economics Study. I believe Councilmember Terry Ryan, who's president of the Economic Development District, I think he's called into this meeting, and of course our past president, Catherine Stanford, is here. We, of course, have a regional economic strategy that was adopted a year ago. The focus of the board since has been on implementing the strategy. One of the action items, in fact, the first action item that was taken up was to support the state's effort to secure the next Boeing airplane, the new mid-market airplane. So we've been playing a very meaningful role at PSRC, and you all have been playing a meaningful role supporting the state's effort. Emily Whitman, who's on our team here at PSRC, we've actually lent some of her capacity and other support from our staff to the Choose Washington NMA Council, and Emily serves as the staff lead for the council. So you're going to get a presentation on that report, which highlights our competitive position as a region, as a state. And then next month, the second action item that the Economic Development District Board took on, which was moving forward with a regional space sector study. We're going to present the results of that at our next Economic Development District meeting, and we'll be sure to share those results with the Executive Board. Just some high-level teasers in terms of the data. The region's space sector, so companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, a lot of amazing companies in our region. It supports 6,200 jobs in Washington State and $1.76 billion in economic activity. And in fact, in the last couple of days, the region has been hosting the New Space Conference. This has been a conference that has alternated between California and our region. They've since made a decision that moving forward, the New Space Conference will be in our region moving forward. So we're not going to have to share with California anymore on that. So really, it's a premier forum for space entrepreneurs, investors, innovators, and decision makers. And I think it's a recognition of the strength of this opportunity in our region that they're making the decision to bring all these leaders of this sector here. So just thanks to Catherine, to Terry, to the whole Economic Development District Board for their work on this. One of the things that we've been very busy with at PSRC has been project selection. This is one of the years where we're holding a two-year competition for our federal transportation dollars. To date, there's been over 250 projects that are competing for $524 million of funding. Next month, in July, we'll be advancing projects that have been recommended through our regional process. Our Transportation Policy Board will take action on those recommendations first, and then at the end of the month, we'll be bringing those recommendations to the Executive Board. There are some excellent projects of all types, projects supporting freight, ferries, transit, key road, last mile connections, great projects throughout the region that are part of that. And of course, each of your counties is going through your county-wide process as we speak. That comes a little later on in the calendar year. But just great projects that we're busy working with all of our partners in the region to advance funding to these key projects. To highlight some places that I've been over the last month, I was at the Eastside Transportation Partnership meeting where they had a discussion and a presentation from the Port of Seattle and their Sustainable Airport Master Plan. Councilmember Lambert, it was thanks for the invitation to King County's Mobility Committee. Appreciated the opportunity to come and present on that. I had a meeting with the new Executive Director of the Master Builders of King and Snohomish County, Kat Sims. It was really a great opportunity to catch up with her and share with her the work that we're doing here at PSRC as part of Vision 2050, planning for growth, and how we're supporting our members to make sure that we can have growth done well in our region. It's really great to get to know Kat. And then I participated with the Seattle Chamber on their East Side study mission. So we got a bunch of business people from Seattle, out of Seattle, to go across Lake Washington and see just some of the amazing things that are happening in Renton, in Bellevue, in Redmond, up in Bothell. We had a great panel of elected officials that kicked off that event. Mayor Chelmanak from Bellevue, Mayor Marchioni from Redmond, Mayor Wallen from Kirkland participated. Really just great way to kick things off. So they did a fantastic job. And then yesterday, I was over in Moses Lake. I serve on the Joint Transportation Commission's air cargo study. This is a statewide look at air cargo capacity planning in Washington. And of course, as we move forward with our efforts here at PSRC for aviation planning, we'll fold that work into our efforts here. And last but certainly not least, Executive Constantine, thanks for providing a fantastic keynote at the Regional Passenger Only Ferry Summit that was held recently. I should say, King County brought together leaders from the entire Puget Sound. So we had folks from our region, from Tacoma, from Kitsap County, obviously from King County and Snohomish there, folks from Renton and Kenmore that care about this. But then we had people from the San Juans, we had people from Island County, we had people from Port Townsend there. So it was really just a Puget Sound-wide bringing together of folks that care about passenger-only ferry service, and it's remarkable to look at the success that has been made in expanding that service over the past decade throughout the region, and great opportunities moving forward. So we've been busy. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions from the Executive Board, Executive Summers, on anything I've covered.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions, comments?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we'll move on. Committee reports are in your packets, and I'd like to ask Executive Dammeyer, Chair of the Operations Committee, to give a report of the meeting they had this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We did get our work done this morning. We have 2 items before the Executive Board on the consent agenda. The first was the Operations Committee recommends approval of the vouchers. That's item 6B. And then we also recommend the increase in contract authority associated with the annual meeting that Josh touched on. There are a couple of things. I would say there were 2 very positives that drove up the costs. One was the increased attendance. We all want that. It's record or near record attendance at the annual meeting. That's a good thing. The other very good thing is there was a decision made to video the whole meeting and then make that available publicly. So I think that's a good transparency mechanism for us to have that out there. So I think that was a positive thing. Also, we increased a little bit of spending more on parking than we had originally budgeted. But all in all, I think that is a very good thing, and the Operations Board recommends approval of that increased authority. The last thing, we also reviewed our monthly standard reports on the budget and still got done on time, and we got to meet 4 new employees. So I'd like to ask Tu Lee to come forward and introduce our 4 new employees to the Executive Board.
Thank you, Executive Dammeyer. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce our newest 4 employees here at PSRC. We have 2 parking data collection interns. The first one is Bin Nguyen. Bin has just graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Geography from University of Washington. Prior to joining us, Bin interned at the Seattle Parks and Recreation. So welcome, Bin. Next, we have Carrie White. Carrie has a Bachelor of Science degree in Exercise Physiology from California State University in Chico. And she's currently pursuing a master's degree in civil engineering and transportation at University of Washington. So Carrie has previously worked for a large nonprofit improving business process and aligning business practices with the mission-based goals. Prior to joining us, Carrie was a data collector at Supply Chain and Logistics Center in Seattle. So welcome, Carrie. Next, we have Tammy Chick. And Tammy is our newest administrative assistant in the Regional Planning Division, and she's been with us since late May. Tammy is the certified Scrum product owner from Solutions IQ. And prior to joining PSRC, Tammy was a business operations and project manager for both Spladaf and Clenero, Inc. So welcome, Tammy. Last but not least is Ryan Tomto. Ryan is our newest senior transportation analyst in the Transportation Planning Division, and he's been with us since earlier this month. Ryan has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Geography from University of Iowa, and recently received a master's degree in Urban and Regional Planning from University of Wisconsin in Madison. And prior to joining us and while attending graduate school, Ryan was also a transportation planner at Amador County Transportation Commission in Sutter Creek, California. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, if you're paying attention, you may have noticed we have a strong UW connection, and somehow Ryan got University of Wisconsin through the UW filter. So I think we need to be a little more discreet there next time. So glad to have the 4 new employees joining us. And Mr. Chair, that's all I have.
Thank you, Bruce, and welcome to the new employees. You're part of a great organization. I'm very grateful for you being here, and anything we can do to make your lives better, let us know. So we'll move on to the consent agenda, and would anybody like anything removed from the consent agenda for discussion?
Move approval.
Motion to approve in a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Consent agenda is adopted. New business. This will be to approve projects to receive PSRC's FHWA contingency funds, and I'll call on Katie McCurdy to give us a presentation.
Good morning. Thank you. I don't have any slides for you today. I'm just going to briefly chat about what's in your agenda packet. As Joss mentioned, we are in the midst of doing our project selection process this year, and you'll see those projects next month, and we will be awarding federal 2021 and 2022 funds. And I'm here today to talk about a bit of a process for our from our last process. So as many of you know, when we go through project selection, we award dollars, and there's always some projects. There are more project requests than project funding available. So we have a process to create a prioritized list of contingency projects so that if we do get funds coming back to us from returned projects, or if our federal allocations come in higher, we have a list of projects that are ready to be awarded. We have been doing that process since about 2004, and I think we have been successfully awarding projects to the contingency list each cycle. Some years are higher than others, but on average, over the last 6 years, we have awarded about $11 million per year to projects on the contingency list. So last cycle was in 2016, and we awarded projects for 2018, 19, and 2020 dollars. And since that time, we do have an amount of dollars returned from canceled projects, delayed projects, and also to some extent just projects that are returning surplus funds at grant closeout. They didn't need quite as much money. So all told, that equals about $18 million. And then in addition to that, for 2017 and 2018, our estimates turned out to be a bit conservative, and when we received our final federal allocations, we did have a larger amount. So all told, we have about $27.5 million available to the currently adopted contingency list. One other thing I would like to note before requesting an action is that we do have a new process now, that because we have to balance our Federal Highway Administration funds by year, and because we have annual targets that we have to meet each year, there's a bit of a cascading process. And when funds are returned or delayed, the first order of business that we do is we look for projects that are awarded in those outer years and allow them to accelerate. So the result of all of that is that the $27 million of additional funds are actually 2020 dollars. And so the contingency recommendation process is for new 2020 dollars. The process has gone through each of the 4 countywide forums as well as the Regional Project Evaluation Committee. They have made their recommendations. They were presented to the Transportation Policy Board in June. And that list of projects is included in your agenda packet. I believe it's item number 7. And with that, my very brief remarks, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. Any questions? All right, is there a motion to approve?
I'd move approval.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that is approved. Thank you. Next item is consideration of approval for updated designation procedures for new regional centers, and I think Jeff Storer is going to give a presentation.
All
All right. Good morning, everybody. Bear with me a second while I pull this up. All right. So good morning. And as mentioned, I'm here to walk through the updated designation procedures for new regional growth centers. You may recall that this is really the first step in implementing the regional centers framework that was adopted by the board just this past March. We do know that there is at least one city, the city of Arlington, that is planning to apply fairly soon. So really updating these and getting these approved today will enable them to do so, as well as any of those other jurisdictions that either are interested in applying soon or just want to understand the expectations of the new regional centers. So very quickly, today I'm going to provide a quick reminder of the regional centers framework and touch on really the new types of regional centers that came out of that work. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time summarizing really the new key provisions and changes in those topic areas in the procedures for new centers. So I'm sure, as you recall, the regional centers framework is really a large body of work. It included a number of different regional planning items. It addressed things, for instance, as major military installations, as well as some common standards for countywide centers. On the regional centers end of things, what the framework did is it expanded our types of centers from 2 to 4. So we now have 2 types of regional centers. Those are the urban growth centers and metro growth centers, as well as manufacturing and industrial centers, which we also tend to call mix. For the mix, we have industrial growth centers and industrial employment centers. And as you can imagine, with 4 new types of centers, we have new provisions for each of those. So we have provisions that need to be updated in the procedures for process, schedule, eligibility, and criteria. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the first things in the framework that was called for is staff to update the procedures to reflect these. So the next couple slides, I'm going to walk through the changes to the procedures and really just focus on those topic areas. I did want to point you to your agenda packet. On page 33, you'll see the complete new set of procedures. But maybe more importantly, on page 39, you'll see a table that highlights each and every change by section, so you can follow along in those sections and see the details of each. So starting with the overview, background, and purpose section, really the changes here I'd consider really administrative in nature. We updated the text to reflect that the regional centers framework has been adopted and the 4 types of centers that came out of that work and that are now in play. For the process and schedule, we addressed 2 things within these sections. We added details about when new regional centers will be considered for designation. Under the current system, when a jurisdiction feels that they've met the criteria, they can apply for regional designation, and the board reviews that at that time. The regional framework calls for that to be limited to our major plan updates like we're going through currently with Vision, and then approximately 5 years following each of our monitoring exercises. The other item we added was 2 additional items that the board can consider in addition to the criteria. So as part of the framework, the board discussion, they wanted to be able to look at the location of centers, ensuring that the designation wasn't putting pressure on rural or resource lands or being placed in environmentally sensitive areas. And then the other piece of that was the number and distribution of regional centers throughout the region. For the eligibility, there's really 4 kind of key areas that include new provisions. So there's an area with provisions on a local commitment. So the framework calls for ensuring that new regional centers have had a local commitment and investment to those and planning efforts for that center. So that's now included. We also have a provision related to centers plan. So under the current procedures, regional centers are able to be designated, and then they have 2 years to develop a centers plan. The framework actually calls for those center plans to be developed prior to being designated. And then finally, there are some key provisions on the location, the appropriate location of each type of center, and existing conditions that should be met prior to being designated. And finally, for the criteria, we've got new provisions really that fall into these six topic areas. We've got new provisions related to activity and zoning. On the activity side, this is really about the thresholds for each center for both existing and planned growth. And then on the zoning side, ensuring that the zoning and the land use can accommodate both the amount of activity and the type of activity for each of those centers. And then for size, we have size for 3 of those 4 centers that are included in the criteria, as well as the expectations for transit. I know that this body did have quite a detailed conversation on the transit expectations for the MICs. So included in that is an acknowledgement that if a MIC isn't served by transit or isn't within a transit district, that there's an expectation that there'll be some TDM strategies in place. And then finally, there's 2 new provisions related to the market potential for regional growth centers, and finally the role of each type of those 4 centers. So the last thing I did want to mention, because it did come up at the Regional Staff Committee as well as the Growth Management Policy Board, is how this relates to existing centers. So these procedures set the procedures for all new centers beyond the current set we currently have. The existing set will be automatically redesignated as part of the Vision 2050 process. So those existing centers don't have to go through a process to reapply through these procedures. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Nancy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. On page 35 of the presentation, there is at the very top of the page, it says the existing infrastructure and utilities can support additional growth in the center. So typically growth pays for growth, and does that mean there won't be any possibility for eligibility for funding to assist with that growth for the infrastructure?
So this was also a conversation at the Growth Management Policy Board, and really these are existing conditions here. So the idea would be when you come in, you may not have all of the infrastructure needed to accommodate your planned growth, but you at least have some infrastructure to accommodate some additional growth. So that additional growth can help as you continue to grow.
Okay, and so I'm just wondering if we need any clarifying language in there, or if it's understood even past our times here as part of the board.
We could add some clarifying language there, similar to the footnotes there at the bottom for the other sections.
Okay, and that also occurs on page 37, item 4 under existing conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And then just one more item on page 35, criteria for metro growth centers. Maybe I'm missing, but are there performance metrics attached with this? I didn't necessarily see them, or maybe I just misunderstood.
So for the designation, there's not performance measures attached to these, but as part of the regional centers framework, we do have a process for monitoring and evaluating regional centers. That will first begin in 2025 after all of the jurisdictions have adopted their next comprehensive plan update, including their center plans.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy.
Thank you. I agree with what Mayor Backus said about page 35. I think you should add some language that they have a plan for the infrastructure, because having that much infrastructure ahead of time is too expensive for anybody to be able to do. So having the plan. Then on page 39, where the one before the last, where it talks about the designation, if served by light rail. Well, some of us probably aren't going to get light rail in our lifetime. So I'm wondering if you could say light rail or transit, so that there's more flexibility for that. Do you see where I'm talking? It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth line up from the bottom. Designation if served by light rail. I'm wondering if it should say for transit added there. And then this isn't a problem in my county, but I have friends that are in other counties, obviously. And so I want to make sure that the other counties who are smaller have enough regional centers that they feel that their people are served adequately. So I know we've talked before about the smaller counties have less people, and I want to make sure that our designations don't mean that only King County gets regional centers and nobody else does. But I know we have at least one in each of the counties, but you know, I'm not a regional leader in those counties, so I want to make sure that I hear from you. If you would like to have more than 1 or 2 in your county, that for me, I would like to help you have what you need. And serving an incorporated section, there are lots of times where your needs aren't really heard. So anyway, I want you to know I'm interested if you need help.
Sure. So first off, for the light rail, I'm assuming that's in the table summarizing the changes. I know in the procedures, the transit service generally is discussed with frequent transit service, so it does include BRT, frequent bus routes, et cetera. So that is covered with kind of general transit. As far as the number of centers in each county, I know the centers framework did discuss having at least 2 in each county. And then I think that would be an ongoing discussion with the board as regional centers are monitored and those results come back, and that would probably play out in the discussion of those performance.
Light rail, if that's what you mean, maybe it needs to say light rail parentheses as defined such and such, because the plain reading of that sentence does not allude to that.
Sure, we can do that.
So just on that point, I think that this was an issue in our county, and this is a change that we propose because we have large areas of urban growth area that are still unincorporated, and but they're going to be served by light rail, and it makes all the sense in the world to be able to plan for, you know, the future. We know light rail is coming eventually, and just because it's unincorporated doesn't mean it's not an urban growth area. So this was a positive change, and again, this is just a summary of the change. It's not the actual language. Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we know at this time which category the city of Arlington is applying for?
They are applying for a manufacturing industrial
MIC,
center.
okay.
I'm not sure which one of those. I'm assuming it's
Not sure which, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure which category within the manufacturing industrial, but that is
Okay.
the general category they're going for.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Terry?
Hi. Yeah, Terry Ryan. Hey, just following up on Councilmember Lambert's comments, which were spot on. I know I was involved in these meetings, and we did agree that there would be a bare minimum of 2 regional centers and 1 MIC for each county, and I want to make sure that's in the final document.
So these procedures address any new regional centers. The framework for the regional centers does discuss that in there, so that is addressed in a separate document.
Okay, because I think that addresses part of Councilmember Lambert's questions. I just wanted to verify that. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah. Yes? On the phone.
This is Mayor Tolber from
Yes.
Arlington.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you. I have a question about removing the provisional regional designations until the center plan is complete. I guess my question would be, what are the expectations in the timeframes of processing new applications?
So the new process actually removes that provisional planning status. So the expectation is that the center plan would be completed prior to designation. So once designated, there is no provisional status. You're a regional center.
I understand that. In the past, centers have been able to apply. It has been sometimes a burdensome time frame going through all of the review. And now that we have narrowed the time frame for applying for new designations, I guess I'm questioning the provisional designation being removed completely.
So, Mayor, this is Josh Brown. I think we can work with you and your community on a path forward there. I mean, I think my guess would be you could submit an application, and we can, if you're in the throes of completing some final elements of the paperwork, then we can get the ball rolling and work with you to get things completed in short order.
Thank you, Josh.
Okay.
Bruce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one of my, I'm following up on some of the tenor of some of these comments. One of my concerns is for our region, I think we need more distributed jobs. You know, we did to get the jobs out where the people are living. That's one of the ways that we're going to reduce commutes, reduce kind of the burden on our transportation system, improve quality of life. So I want to make sure that we're not putting in place so many criteria that effectively we preclude any future centers. So that would be my only concern as we go forward. It feels like we're adding additional criteria in this process. Are we adding new criteria, or are we refining existing criteria?
So I think we're doing both. Some of them are refinements, some are new aspects, but as part of that regional centers framework, we also further develop the countywide centers and a variety of centers. So there are other opportunities to still have that employment in centers that aren't just regional.
Executive Damar, a couple things. One is we're following the direction and the policies that this board set. Second is, and Mayor Tolbert, having you on the phone might be helpful here, our current manufacturing industrial center policies wouldn't allow a place like Marysville, Arlington to compete and be created as a manufacturing industrial center. So I think there is flexibility in here to be able to try to develop job centers throughout our region, and probably that Marysville, Arlington application is the best example of that we're going to have, that will be able to review as a region and have the opportunity to support, whereas if we didn't have these updated policies, they wouldn't qualify at all.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Josh, I appreciate that. The difference, though, is I thought, I mean, this, when I was reviewing these, I was expecting them to be kind of limited updates reflecting how you allow things like Arlington that we had approved to come in, and it just feels, it's got this feeling that we're being more extensive with the expansion of the criteria, kind of beyond what I was expecting was limited, kind of limited adjustments in the criteria to allow those. That's my only concern as we go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other comments? Okay. These are, this is an action item, and so I'll look for a motion.
So, and Executive Summers, just following some of the feedback, so I think what would be helpful for staff would be if we could get a motion for support, and then based off of the feedback that we received from Mayor Bacchus on page 35, let's see here, item A at the very top, we can add a footnote to be clear that not all the infrastructure would be in place. I think the intent is to make sure that those communities are planning for that infrastructure come on board, with the development, and that'd be a simple footnote we could add. So that would be my recommendation of the board.
Is there a motion to that effect?
I would move to adopt as with the suggested amendment.
Thank you. Is there a second? Motion and a second. Discussion. I'd just like to say that very much there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this. We view the addition of the MIC designations as a increase in flexibility and a change in the policies and guidelines that'll give us some additional tools going forward. So we see the amendments as being very positive. Yes. Becky?
Yeah, a couple comments. I'm going to support this motion because I think it's the right thing to do. With that, however, we did have some pretty heated conversations about military centers in order to get here, and I have that expectation and hope that this board or this organization will continue those conversations about military centers in order to establish them for regional funding. We have effectively large cities that are completely off the radar and are not supported by regional funding. Second of all, I appreciate the fact that the provisional status is going away. I think it makes the process a lot cleaner. The third thing I have to say, however, is when I hear about large infrastructure going into unincorporated areas, it kind of flies in the face of I think, the intent of the Growth Management Act. And so I'm a little concerned about that activities. So I would also support not just having light rail in that sentence, but something like bus rapid transit or transit connectivity. We got to we really have to work on incorporating our unincorporated areas. And I come from Kitsap, where we have Silverdale, so we're all in this together, so thank you.
Thank you. And I think part of the, for us, just on that issue of unincorporated is as you drive north into Snohomish County along I-5, much of that area has been in the urban growth area since day one, since 1990. And but the whole area between Everett and Linwood has been urban growth area and is served by I-5 and has been developing at urban densities. And so, but it, for example, Mill Creek hasn't annexed anything in many years, and Linwood's thinking about it, and so it's just been a slow process, but the intent is for all those areas to be annexed eventually. So.
Yeah, I said, well, we have Silverdale and Kitsap. We've got the same thing going on, but that's not the intent of what I think we're trying to do here.
Yep. Any other comments? Yes, Bruce.
So just to chime in, Pierce County also has a large section of what is currently unincorporated, but is developing at urban levels in the Parkland-Spanaway area in particular, and will be served by bus rapid transit. So it is part of that. So at least the three of the counties have similar situations that I think kind of color how we look at some of these things. Some folks think that if it's in unincorporated, then therefore it's rural, and those are not at all the case in many instances. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Roger.
Thank you. I intend to support this. I wanted to point out that all these places you talked about are the places we have the worst congestion problems. And there may be a link. There just might be a link to that. And I hope the next time we go through this that we think about transit access is important to these centers, but logistics access, we tend to focus on the commuter, and their goods and services need to get to places in order for there to be jobs. So looking at, I mean, we talk about infrastructure, we talk specifically about transit, but I think we need to talk more and more about freight when we think about designating these centers. It's just something to keep in mind. Thanks.
Yes, Bruce.
Thank you. I'd just like to, from my perspective at least in Pierce County, some of the biggest congested areas are on I-5 around Tacoma, where we've been doing construction for a long time, and I-5 as it goes through Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Where we have a project planned, and we're not actually doing anything in Tacoma. We just move the cones around every.
Yeah, we're starting to figure that out slowly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Glenn, did you have anything else? Oh, okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion passes. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
We'll move on to our discussion item about Vision 2050 and the formal start of the update in the regional growth strategy. So, Ben McKinta.
Good morning, Executive Summers and members of the board. Let me pull this up for you quickly. I have a brief update this morning on progress with the Vision 2050 project. We last came to you in April with a summary of the public opinion survey that we had conducted over the winter, as well as a review of comments that we received in the scoping process as part of this project. And so now we've moved along, and today I'm going to talk about the scoping report that was adopted by the Growth Management Policy Board at their meeting earlier this month, as well as some preliminary work that they've been doing to refine the regional growth strategy. They've heard a lot. You've all given us direction, and they've gotten a lot of direction, and we've heard a lot of comment about some different ideas about how we might approach the regional growth strategy in the update. So this is our calendar we'd like to show. Again, this is all aiming toward an adoption of Vision 2050 in the spring of 2020. And so this year, in 2018, after concluding the scoping process, we are moving into a research and policy review and planning phase with the intention of releasing a environmental impact statement, a supplemental EIS, that building on the Vision 2040 EIS in late winter so early in 2019, with a draft plan available for public review next summer. So we're on a pretty tight timeline. A reminder, we were out around the region in our scoping process, 45-day comment period where we heard a lot, conducted listening sessions. These are some images from actually three of the five we conducted, got over 1,300 comments. Those were drawn from letters, including 24 letters from some of our local jurisdictions, as well as 23 other organizations and agencies. So we had a lot to chew on. In the scoping report, there's a summary. We summarized those 1,300 comments into 31 categories. And the report also serves as the official document that lays out our intent to prepare a supplemental EIS, provides a broad schedule for updating the plan, as well as identifies some of these core changes that we'll be making, including using our new year 2050 employment and population forecasts to support the development of a new regional growth strategy or a refined growth strategy, and then to address some statutory changes and other outdated information that we've identified in the last several years. One thing is important to remember, when Vision 2040 was adopted, that was in 2008, prior to Link Light Rail opening, prior to ST2 being passed, prior to ST3 being passed, connecting Washington, a lot of new projects and change in the region since 2008. In those 31 comment areas, as well as direction from the Growth Management Policy Board, we heard really great interest in looking at the regional growth strategy. We'll have multiple board work sessions on the growth strategy, and we'll bring updates to you as those proceed. We heard housing is something that we should have a laser focus on. There are a lot of new housing issues in this region since Vision was adopted 10 years ago. One illustration of that is the public opinion survey that we conducted, identified housing and affordability and quality of life, those issues, as the #1 concern of people in our region. Those weren't even in really the top 10 issues 10 years ago. So region is changing rapidly, and our regional plans and policies should need to adjust to that change. A lot of interest in continued work or emphasis on climate change and resilience, as well as social equity, displacement concerns, new issues that suburban jurisdictions are experiencing, and so to reflect that in the regional plan. Of course, these are focus areas, but other policy issues will also be addressed, and you can see a listing there. If you want a complete rundown, we're soon to release the final formatted version of the scoping report. It'll be posted soon. It has summaries of all of those 31 topic areas and what we heard from the outreach process. As a reminder, we wanted to step back when thinking about refinements to the regional growth strategy. So prior to Vision 2040, we had a growth strategy in Vision 2020, which had been adopted in 1995, shortly after the Growth Management Act was passed. And it really focused on three core things. First of all, identifying our urban growth area in the region, supporting compact communities of some sort, and it talked about centers in a fairly high-level way. That was really it. There was discussion of urban areas, rural areas, natural resource lands, but there wasn't a lot of guidance about how we could coordinate urban growth areas, supporting compact communities, designating centers across the region. And so as a result of that lack of detail, one of the things that we saw emerging from that was not all counties working with their cities had established employment targets. working with the population projections from OFM, not every county identified a process where local jurisdictions identified housing targets rather than population targets. So it was really difficult to add it all up at the regional scale and understand what was the regional growth strategy? What is that jobs housing balance across the region? And so one of the things that the Vision 2040 growth strategy tried to do was, in order to get at some core objectives and outcomes like protecting natural systems and resource lands, focusing growth in the UGA, in cities and in centers, and ensuring that we sustain and support the rural area and keep them rural, improving that jobs housing balance, and so forth, was to come up with a system of regional geographies where we looked at different types of cities and their roles for accommodating growth across the region, and provide some regional guidance in terms of the relative percentage of growth within each county that ought to go to different types of cities, leaving a lot of discretion at the county and local level to identify particular growth targets for each jurisdiction, recognizing not all small cities are the same, not all large cities are the same, and that those local decisions really could best identify the right amount of growth for those places. Something we heard, however, in the last, well, I'll step back, in the last couple of years is that this distinction between larger cities and small cities was somewhat artificial with some of these major infrastructure projects that the voters have authorized. That should play a larger role in understanding the relative shares of growth that might be appropriate for different parts of the region, and so we should be thinking about that as we refine the regional growth strategy. The Growth Management Policy Board over this last spring and winter they've had a series of conversations about how is the growth strategy performing, the one that's in Vision 2040. You can see the two charts, if you can see them. The hollow bars are the regional growth strategy relative percentage of overall population in the purple and employment in the teal. How much growth should be going region-wide to these different types of places? And you can see the actual growth from 2000 through 2016. And largely across the region, the actual growth has matched up pretty well with the regional growth strategy. Certainly there are differences in the 4 counties, and that's something that we need to look at. But overall, the growth is looking is matching up fairly well. And something to really consider as part of this is that Vision 2040 was adopted in 2008 with the recession and sort of fiscal relief bills passed in Olympia. The originally anticipated local update of comprehensive plans to match up with Vision 2040, that was supposed to originally happen in 2011, and that didn't happen until 2015 with some delays there. So we're talking about really only a couple of years of growth under newly adopted comprehensive plans that have been adjusted to match up with the regional vision plan. So something to consider. Also, and we have a lot of detailed data behind all of this. We can provide it. It's posted on the Growth Management Policy Board's website. But one thing also that's important to note, this graph is interesting. We're beginning to see some changes in recent years. So the gray bars represent the 2000 base of population, the percentage of each relative, these are for Bremerton, Tacoma, and Everett, for their percentage of 2000 population for their county. The hollow bar shows the regional growth strategy, percentage of growth anticipated to go to that jurisdiction. The green shows 2000-2008 change, so prior to Vision 2040 being adopted. The purple shows 2008 through 2017. And then the teal shows that 2014 to 2017. So you can see the steepness of the curve. More growth is going to, in the last several years, is going to places like Bremerton, Tacoma, and Everett. So we're beginning to see some real movement and change in the way that growth is being accommodated within the region. So I mentioned already there have been some conversations about how do we begin to look at the growth strategy, make some refinements to reflect new conditions, new priorities. The board so far has stated pretty strongly to reaffirm the focus on jurisdictions with designated regional centers. They had just, like you, gone through a year or more of work in looking at the regional centers framework. Those continue to be important places, or should be, in the revised or refined growth strategy. But they asked us to look at a couple of ways to differentiate between cities based on infrastructure, either planned or existing, and not just transit infrastructure, but other types of infrastructure as well. And so we're looking into a way to do that, and we'll be working with the Growth Management Policy Board to come up with some alternatives. And in particular, speaking to the issue that some of you spoke to in the last agenda item, to really identify that there are parts of unincorporated urban areas that are quite different than other parts. Some are on the edge of the urban growth area, some are centrally located, some will have high-capacity transit or major infrastructure supporting them, other parts won't. And so to consider that as part of the update to the regional growth strategy. And of course, as also mentioned earlier, and in the regional centers framework, to recognize major military installations within the regional geographies, description of types of places within the region. So next steps, at the July Policy Board meeting next week, July 5th, we'll see what kind of turnout we get in the morning after the 4th of July. But we will be having an extended work session on housing to really dive into what the existing housing policies look like and what they may be missing, where we should put some effort to make some revisions. We'll have a series of meetings in the fall, continuing the discussion on the regional growth strategy, aiming at identifying a range of alternatives to include in the EIS. So the real intention there is to have some alternatives that are different enough from one another that when we examine them and analyze them in an EIS, we can see perceivable differences between options. So it's not to pick a preferred alternative, it's to identify that range, including a no-action alternative that can be evaluated in the SEPA process. And so the goal is to have those identified in November so that we can work with our consultants and release an environmental impact statement at the end of February. And again, the target for a draft plan then is to release something for an extended public review period next summer. And that's all I had today. Happy to answer any questions, but we're moving along. There's a lot of work. The calendar is starting to scare some of us a little bit, but we think we're well prepared to do it, and there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm for making some good changes to the Vision 2050.
Thank you, Ben.
Kerry.
Am I on? Yeah. Having sit in on 20, 30 years of regional growth strategies in urban centers, and the elephant that's out of the room is obviously housing and affordable housing, and a lot of growth that we're seeing in Kitsap County now is specifically to that point. We still have, I see we're the lowest in 348,000. Back in the, in the 80s and 90s when we were thinking about this sort of thing, we really missed the housing issue. With the average in Bellevue, John, we never really addressed what we were going to do if housing costs got to where they are today, and whether or not we were going to have some kind of housing strategy around affordability, homelessness, all those kind of, we completely missed that. And it's pretty obviously we did. And groups like this have been meeting around here for 40 years. I've been a part of them. And I only urge us to really try for the next generations of people that are going to come after us to at least come close to come up with some answers on these issues, because previous generations have not. And I was part of that. And I'm sorry we didn't, because my own daughter, who is living in Seattle, two things have happened to her in the last 2 years. One, she got beat up downtown by a homeless person walking back to her rent-controlled, one of the few in Seattle. And two, she decided she couldn't afford to live in Seattle anymore, so she's moved to Kitsap County. And I'm sure she's in a large group of people. So I just hope, that we get serious about this time. Thanks.
Well, and Commissioner, that's absolutely reflective of what we heard in our public opinion survey. And I think as we move forward, and Ben alluded to the Growth Management Policy Board meeting on July 5th, where they're going to be rolling up their sleeves talking about this issue. We were wondering, so July 5th, the day after 4th of July, do they want to meet there the following week? They said, absolutely, we want to meet to be able to have this meeting, this important discussion. But I think that's step one to help you all build consensus on, so what do you want reflected in our plan, and how can we be helpful to the work that's happening at the city and county level to confront this issue? Because it's on the minds of everybody, absolutely.
And also just add that we're building on a lot of great work that's been happening in the region over the last couple of years. There's been a King County-led affordable housing or housing task force that has created great material for us to work with. We've hosted here a housing work session where we brought in folks from across the housing development industry, nonprofit, for-profit. We had 75 people sold out workshop here in this room where we really wrestled through a lot of these issues and hope to incorporate that into the updated plan.
The last number, what was it for minimum income people in Seattle? The average drive now has gone from an hour and 20 minutes to an hour and 40 minutes to get to where they can afford a house.
Kathy.
Oops.
To what the last speaker said, after World War II, they figured out how to make housing. And some of those houses are still here, and they're really cute. So I think that there's some things that we should be doing. So, most people forget that the GMA had 13 points and later a 14th point on what needs to be kept into balance. And if we look at the Chase-Shiller Index for the AMI for housing, we are not hitting any of those categories. And in some of them, our percentage is 0. So we should be really taking and looking at tying what we're doing and making decisions based on the Chase-Shiller Index and being able to say when it gets down to a certain percentage of that we have an emergency meeting and we make changes. Because, as you said, it's really important that people have a place to live. And so that was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing is that we have not looked at all of the parts of the GMA. And we do really well in the ones that we've done and we like, but the ones we haven't done, which were partly what was said in the 638-page fiscal responsibility report afterwards, haven't been done. And until we get that done, unincorporated areas are not going to be sustainable. And I've talked with my little cities, and they say that, the thing we worry about most is that the character of our city will be gone, because you're saying you want us to go up 2 floors, 3 floors, 4 floors, whatever. And for this 2-block area, that would ruin us, because that's not the character of what we want. So I think we have to look at our little cities and say, where is the area you don't want changed? Not now, not ever. So that you are identified as that particular city. And then in my district, our demographer said that almost half of our growth is our own babies. And so for you, talking about your daughter, you don't want your daughter being an hour and a half away. At least I don't think you do. I don't want mine being that far away. An 18th grandchild is arriving in 3 months, and I don't want them living way, way far away because my quality of life depends on having 18 grandchildren to party with me. To take care of me. And the last thing I want to say is I think that when we're looking at small cities and large cities, the small cities is up to 22,000. There's a huge difference in a city of 22,000 as opposed to a city of 10,000. I think we should call those cities mid-cities and talk about what we can do for little cities, because I have lots of cities that are under 10,000, and they need certain things that a city of 11,000 to 22,000 may not need. So those are some suggestions.
Yeah, thank you.
And that last point, council member, so looking at the geographies, the framework we have in place, we adopted, but making changes to it and improving upon it, we look forward to having that discussion. I know over in Kitsap County, so one of those large cities is Bainbridge Island. right? Because you're over that magical 22,000 population. So that'll be absolutely something on the table for the boards to consider.
Reminded of the saying planners have is there's two things people don't like, density and sprawl. Right. So, Roger?
That's right. We don't like density. We don't like sprawl. Great conversation on housing, and something I'd add to that when we talk about the cost of housing, we need to look at the cost of housing and the cost of transportation to that housing, because driving to qualify relies on an endless supply of uncongested, cheap transportation, which we don't have anymore. But something I wanted to add to the mix that we haven't talked about is the impact of the recent Supreme Court non-decision on fish passage. We have, as a region, a treaty obligation to do something to protect the fishery. It's absolutely the right thing to do. To our agency, it's somewhere between $2.4 and $3.7 billion over the next 12 years. But that decision will also impact cities and counties and private property owners, and really needs to be baked into our strategy for 2050. So I would encourage staff to add that to the list.
Great, thank you. Becky?
Yeah, I was interested when I was looking at your, where you're showing the rate of growth, the percentages, and that's a little calculation I do every time we get the new OFM numbers. And I think what you really need to do, however, is to look at all the cities and the unincorporated areas, because the small cities, at least in Kitsap County, are growing much faster as a rate of growth than the larger cities. So, I mean, if when a small city goes from 5 to 10,000 people in 12 years, that would be like a larger city doubling. Okay, so it's a doubling mechanism. And in fact, when I sent it out to my council, I wrote the email. The name of the email was Scary Data. Okay, because it is really frightening how quickly the small cities are growing. So I think what you put up there is not a real complete picture. And that the small cities are actually, at least in Kitsap County, and I believe in the other counties as well, as a rate of growth are growing faster.
Yeah.
The other thing we all need to remember with affordable housing is, don't forget, 8 years ago, I was running around counting houses that were foreclosed, right? We were right in the middle of the recession. There was housing everywhere. People were losing their houses. There were abandoned houses. The apartments were sitting empty. Part of what we're dealing with right now is the shock of going from negative growth to very rapid growth. And I'm not trying to be dismissive on the affordable housing conversation. It's a huge issue, but remembering the pendulum swaying really far one way, let's make sure we don't swing it really far back the other way, else we could be in an equally huge problem. So.
And just one thing to respond, absolutely in terms of the data, we have very detailed data for each county, looking at individual cities and groups of cities, and the Growth Management Policy Board is looking through that data as well. So absolutely understand and respect the nuance of the conversation across the region. In the interest of time, we kept it to high-level regional numbers.
To Mr. Millar's point on fish passage, there is an organization and a consortium, if you will, for the first time, of sports fishermen and the tribes. And while they're dealing primarily with ocean-bound or Puget Sound-bound resident fish, the passage will also be an ancillary issue with them. So I think it's probably prudent that we look into where they're meeting and where those organizations are, so we can keep pace with it. It's interesting that the two of them are agreeing on something for the first time.
Well,
Bruce? No.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Roger.
I was just going to say, yeah, we are coming to agreement on a number of things, but what's exciting about the fish passage is it's about the watersheds and protecting the watersheds. And when we're talking about growth, we need to incorporate that watershed protection into our growth discussion.
Bruce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ben, I'm trying to, and again, I'm relatively new to this process. This will be my first trip through, as opposed to the chair who's been through this I think Moses was around.
Yeah, the first plan was on stone.
There you go. Exactly. So I think if we go back to slide 8, which is this is I think your summary of what were the priorities of Vision 2040.
Correct. And so part of the, I'm sorry to interrupt, so the Growth Management Policy Board is looking at these and revising these as well as part of the process.
So one of my questions, some of those I think the plan may have worked very, very well on. So you're telling me in the Vision 2040, improving jobs, housing balance across the region was a priority?
It was a priority, and actually looking at the forecasts at the time, and when looking at the regional, the relative shares of growth, employment, and housing to each of the counties, there was an explicit choice made at that time to actually call for more employment growth in Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap counties than was otherwise forecast, and to call for more housing development in King County. And so that was a choice. It was 60,000 people and 60,000 jobs were moved around. You know, it was a policy, an aspirational part of the regional growth strategy, but that's baked into the current plan right now in terms of what the express policy direction would be for a future for the region.
So are we then going to say, because it sounds to me, I mean, from my perspective, it sounds like those goals kind of, or at least from Pierce County's perspective, weren't achieved very well. Are we going to be reevaluating the policies as to whether you know, this was the policy we thought would get there.
Sure.
It didn't work. We need new policy to try to get to that goal.
Yeah, when we looked at the overall employment growth by county compared to the regional growth strategy, I don't have that slide in this deck, but it was presented to the Growth Management Policy Board. We looked at Pierce County, for example, matched up very well with the amount of that forecast or the amount of growth that is in the regional growth strategy in terms of overall employment growth for the period to date. Now, are those jobs in the right location? Do they? What kind of pay do those jobs offer? Those are other questions that we need to look at. But in terms of overall growth of jobs in the counties outside of King County, we've seen some pretty robust job growth over this period from 2000.
My other question, Ben, and this is for me again as a relatively newbie, and we have a lot of new members both in the room, on the phone, and who aren't on the call today. Help me understand the regional growth strategy. What does that do for Vision 2050? Does that establish growth targets? Is it broad guidance? Is it a requirement? What comes from the regional growth strategy as we're about to start putting that thing together?
Sure. The regional growth strategy as it exists, and of course you can make any sort of guidance or policy choices in Vision 2050 that you wish, but right now, the way it stands, Vision 2040, excuse me, identifies relative shares of growth, not specific numbers, but relative shares of growth to different categories of cities, and that guidance is there in order to provide some guidance to counties working with their cities as they take the OFM population projections and work through a target setting process. So it is it's guidance, and it's something that we look at as part of evaluating countywide planning policies, and that's the way it's currently structured.
So just to try to make sure I understand that. So the counties then, as they're allocating the OFM population, should consider the regional growth strategy, but if they have the ability to depart from it?
Yeah, to some degree, yes. That's the way that the current plan is structured. That the growth strategy is guidance, and that it was agreed that this pattern of growth across the region offered the most benefits and helped best to get to these objectives that the region expressed as key goals to strive for. And when you look at the actual regional targets, the local targets compared to the regional growth strategy at each county level, there are some departures for these different types of categories of cities and unincorporated areas compared to the numbers that are in Vision 2040. They were evaluated when those countywide planning policies were initially adopted, and we found them to be consistent with the direction expressed in the Vision 2040 plan, but there's certainly room for some departures when counties and cities are making those decisions about local targets.
But part of the reason I ask is there, as we talked about before, housing, that's an area that I think differs dramatically depending on where you are in the region. We just talked about the unincorporated urban level development within urban growth areas. That's an area that I would certainly like to get as much of Pierce County's urban level unincorporated. I'd like to get that incorporated. So those are some of kind of our strategies that may have more of a local look than a regional look, depending upon. So that's why I asked the question.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the targets are set at the local level,
Adopted by the
cities and
counties.
Yeah. And as been articulated between the different geographies, we had differences amongst each of our 4 counties in terms of the split between our metropolitan centers and large cities, small cities, core cities, et cetera. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ben. So we're going to move on to our discussion of the Aerospace Competitive Economics Study, and I'll call on Emily Whitman to present that material.
Thanks. Yeah.
Good morning, thank you. So it's going to be job performance time here at PSRC, so this question will help determine how I do on it. Who knows that Boeing is considering building an all-new airplane? Good. Who knows that the governor pulled together a council of statewide leaders to help with that effort? Okay, so I got a little bit of work to do. Great. Thank you. So as mentioned, I'm Emily Whitman. I am an economic policy analyst here at PSRC, but since January, I've been loaned out to the Washington State Department of Commerce to help staff the governor's Choose Washington NMA, New Mid-Market Airplane Council. This is a group of statewide leaders that were pulled together, and that group continues to expand as new communities and new leaders hear about us and are interested in helping out. This really is a statewide industry, as we'll talk about today, and so we're really thrilled to have leaders from all corners of our state involved and excited about this effort. The main question, of course, is where will this potential new aircraft be built? And of course, we want it built here in Washington State. But to back up a little bit, I just want to share about why aerospace matters. It's one of our oldest industries in Washington, but still very much relevant, still very strong today. So we continually hear these stats. The council's in the process of updating its economic impact study, so these will change a little bit. But to note, 2.7 jobs, almost 3 jobs, are created or supported by one aerospace job here in Washington State, which is pretty incredible. We have an amazing ecosystem in Washington because of aerospace, and I just want to build out those connections for you. So we have aerospace here because of our history in timber and in shipbuilding, in airmail, if you can believe it. But today we have our strength in jets, and that has led to a strength in electric airplanes, unmanned aerial vehicles, biofuels for airplanes, precision agriculture with the use of drones, and it seems just about 5 different ways to get to space in the next couple of decades. But aerospace also touches on the other strengths in our state, in tech, but also in life sciences. And I just want to share, I also attended the Chamber study mission to the East Side, and we were over looking at some work that Intellectual Ventures did with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to figure out a better way to get the critical vaccines to the last stop, you know, on the trek, how to make sure those vaccines survive. And we're looking at this amazing, you know, new container that doesn't take any electricity, it's really durable, and the person who figured that out to help save lives was a Blue Origin engineer. So we have an incredible talent pool in Washington State that continues to benefit other industries, not just in aerospace or in space. So that's why we have to keep our strength in aerospace, because it helps us all out. And one way that the state is interested in doing that is by competing for and winning the next new airplane opportunity brought forward by Boeing. So as I mentioned, it's been dubbed the NMA. Analysts expect a launch decision sometime at the end of this year or even Q1 of next year. We were anticipating some type of deadline before Farnborough. That's in a couple weeks, and the company is still in the process of making its business case. And as they're doing that, Washington State is making its case of how to be the clear choice for this new not only design, but production and then final assembly for the plane as well. Details about the plane were first announced at the Paris Air Show last summer. Something to know is that fifth generation wing and then the extensive use of composites. We have an incredible investment up in Everett with the $1 billion composite wing center. So the fact that the wings will be built here is probably a shoe-in, but there are components for airplanes that come from every part of the state. Our supply chain is statewide as well, and so every part of our state has a stake in this. We also feel like the rest of the country and even some international locations have a stake in this as well. So we are the destination for aerospace jobs. However, other folks like to say that they're the destination for aerospace jobs as well. We've heard recently some new interest from our southeastern states in the country that they're putting together a similar effort. We're happy to talk more about why we think we're number one, and a part of that is the fact that we've been coming at this since December, and even before the governor's group came together, Snohomish County's task force came together as well. So we've been hard at work, and we're glad to see that they're just starting out with their efforts. So as I mentioned, the council was called together, and it really is statewide, but it's also statewide businesses, businesses within our supply chain. Members of our labor unions are working together with government, with Aerospace Futures Alliance representing industry, with our education partners. We have two co-chairs. One is Dr. Noel Schulz, who is, in addition to being a professor at Washington State University, is the First Lady and leads efforts in STEM, and leads efforts in getting women in particular and more diverse faculty involved in STEM. And then we have Rick Bender, who is the former Washington State Labor Council, leading our effort. Again, I want to restate, this is really statewide, and we released the Teal study, which our colleague Evan Woods here with Olympic Analytics will share on, with all of those folks I mentioned. Snohomish County was represented by Mayor Cassie Franklin of Everett. We had Pierce County represented. Executive Constantine was there representing King County. And then on the other side of that photo, on the other side of the governor, we had representatives from Spokane, representatives from education, and then we had representatives from Grant County in the crowd as well. So that's me getting ahead of myself. I'm pretty passionate about this, I hope you can tell. So we know that we're number one in aerospace. We say that we're the global leader in aerospace. And we wanted the facts and the data to not only back that up, but give us a clear understanding of what we need to do to be the leader in aerospace for the next 100 years. So the council contracted with an internationally respected independent aerospace research firm, the Teal Group. Richard Abalafia is basically the name in aerospace analysis. And so we wanted him to come in and take a really hard look at not only our state, but tell us where we measure up against all other 50 states and the District of Columbia, show us where we're ahead, and show us where we need to do a little bit more work. So Evan is going to tell us about the facts and data that they came up with.
I'm Evan Woods. So I'm the founder and chief consultant at Olympic Analytics, and I did the economic research underlying the Teal report, working with Richard and Tom from the Teal Group. So this study was funded by the IAM District 751 machinists and SPIA engineers as part of the Choose Washington NMA Council. And it really has two components to it. There's a business analysis by Richard Abalafia, who is the leading aerospace analyst in the country. He's based out of North Virginia. And then also an economic analysis with rankings and data underlying the business case. Richard has over 3 decades of experience. He writes for Forbes.com and then also Aviation Week. And he's constantly quoted in the Seattle Times, Puget Sound Business Journal, and so he brings a lot of credibility to the report. The rankings are based on 41 metrics that are publicly available data, so anyone can check what we've done publicly available weighting so everyone can understand how the model is built, grouped into 8 categories. And the long and short of it is that Washington State came out in the top 5 for 7 of the 8 categories, including costs, industry, labor and education, tax climate, risk to operations, research and innovation. I mean, across the board, factors that are important to aerospace production, we rank in the top 5, if not, number 1, 2, or 3. So I think the best way to think about Washington's advantage is really based on 3 pillars. So there's our economy, which is really driven by technology and innovation, and it's unique in that respect. And we rank number 1 in the economy category, and is becoming increasingly important to aerospace production as manufacturing becomes more automated. The second kind of factor that really contributes to our advantage in aerospace is a very business-friendly tax climate and cost climate here in Washington State. And the final is just our large aerospace manufacturing footprint, where we have huge facilities across the state, and we have a wealth of skilled veteran labor to draw upon to build planes. And you can see that with our productivity, right, which is kind of one main measurement of how good we are in aerospace. I mean, we build 15 times as many planes as South Carolina. We build 21 times as many planes as Alabama. And we export more aerospace products and manufacturing than California, Texas, Alabama, Florida, Arizona, South Carolina, all combined. And so we're by far the nation's leader in aerospace. This dominance in aerospace is built upon a 100-year tradition, as Emily mentioned. And in the 20s, actually, Washington communities and government got into the business of helping and supporting the industry. A local landowner sold the land for Boeing Field for $1 to the Boeing company. And the Seattle City Council approved roads and electrification of the original Boeing facilities, right? And since then, we provided sales tax breaks, we provided B&O tax breaks, 7 other aerospace incentives in Washington State to help grow and nurture this industry. So UW and Washington State University have provided education, training programs, right? We've been really supportive of the aerospace industry, and it shows, right? The 737 plant in Renton is one of the world's most productive. We have 1,400 aerospace companies and a huge supplier chain here in Washington State. And we have the highest concentration of aerospace engineers and production workers in the world. And that's kind of borne out in the data. So I wanted to share a few, how do we go back, of the report's highlights. So when we think about Washington State, oftentimes people say, oh, but yeah, you're high cost, right? It's union labor, it's machinists and engineers. We're high cost in Washington State. What we've done in the ACES study is look at, well, you pay money for something, but what do you get from it, right? It's not just about cost, it's about output and production. And so our cost metric looked at productivity. How much output is generated for every dollar of labor input? And in that respect, we ranked 4th in the nation. So we're extremely competitive on cost when you look at what you get for it. We also have the lowest electricity prices for industrial use in the entire country, right, which is extremely important when you talk about the Composite Wing Center. A ton of electricity goes into automated processes. That's going to become more and more important, and we have the cheapest rates in the nation. And then our tax climate, for a West Coast state with extremely good universities and a very skilled, educated population, we have very low competitive taxes. I mean, we have more competitive taxes than a lot of these southeastern states that folks always talk about with great business climates, right? We have no corporate income tax. We have no individual income tax. And even our B&O rate, if you make it equivalent to a corporate rate, places us at number 6 in the nation, a lot better than North Carolina and other southern states. So we're very competitive on the cost and tax front. There we go. And then our education and labor is fantastic, right? 1 out of 29 folks in Washington State has an engineering degree. We have the highest concentration of aerospace engineers in the country. On the innovation side, we're 3rd in patents per capita and 5th in R&D investment. And we rank number 1 in the economy category because we have very fast GDP growth, and also we're number 3 in global manufacturing connectivity. And so all of this came out in these 41 metrics across 8 categories, and when you add everything up, we're number 1 by a mile. I think our index composite score is like 11 or 12. The next closest state is Ohio at 19. and then comes North Carolina at 19.5, and it goes on from there. But basically, everyone else is clustered here, and we're here. So it was exciting to see that come out in the data, and I think it's important. But there are also a few areas where we can still improve. So as the McCleary decision showed, we need to invest more in K through 12, and we've been investing more in K through 12. So in the report, the data only goes up to 2015, and we're ranked 28th in the nation. But already the 2016 numbers came out right before the report was released, and we're 22nd, right? And if you look at 2017, I'm sure we're going to continue to move up in those regards. Workforce training programs are important, and then investment in transportation. So the one area where Washington didn't do quite as well was infrastructure, where we ranked 14th. And a lot of that is road quality, which could be the rain. But road quality, transportation spending can always be improved and should be improved, and probably will be improved as part of a package to attract the NMA airplane. But those are the areas of improvement. But generally, I would say we're doing very well, and we should feel very confident in our chances to land the NMA. And then I'm happy to answer, questions folks have afterwards, but I'm going to pass it back to Emily.
Yeah, so it's good timing. Farnborough International Air Show in England is coming up in a couple of weeks, and the results of the Teal study and some of the other narrative that the council has been trying to show out of this is going to be used when we're there. I'm sure some of the other states will say, yeah, Washington cooked the books, but just like the governor said at our press conference, he really encourages them to take a look at the methodology, take a look at the data. Yeah, you'd be hard pressed to find a way to shake things differently that dips us further down or brings somebody else ahead. And that is because other states are growing their aerospace presence and their aerospace concentration. Ours has been growing for 100 years, so we're just ahead of the curve, but we do have some more work to do. There's a workforce development work group as part of the council who has been meeting to develop recommendations. There's now interest because of that number 14 ranking in infrastructure to put together a subcommittee on infrastructure and transportation. The nice thing is that these solutions that this council will come up with are not only going to benefit our competitiveness for the NMA opportunity, they benefit our competitiveness for every type of aerospace opportunity. We go to Farnborough, we're not just talking to Boeing about this, we're talking to other aerospace suppliers who want to come here because of what we've built. So this is going to benefit our entire aerospace industry, and then we'll have that trickle effect into the other industries that we not only have a growing presence of, but have a real strength of. So it's just good for all Washington jobs in the future. Evan and I are happy to take any questions, but I do want to say more information is available on our website as well. Many communities around Washington have already joined the NMA home team. In particular, I would like to thank Executive Steinmeier and Executive Summers for their leadership. They sit on our executive committee for this group, Executive Constantine as well. Their communities have not only invested their time, but their resources as well to make this happen. We have communities in Grant County, in Spokane County, and in Snohomish County looking to build out their local pitches. Those will be trickling up into a statewide communication to the company, but we are waiting for Boeing's direction on that. They need to make the business case, and we're waiting for them to come to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Good job. Questions? Glenn.
Port of Everett just signed on yesterday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, great job. I just want to caution us, although the history is wonderful and the metrics are great, companies do have choices of where they relocate, and there's a lot of things that drive that choice. And I know in Snohomish County we're very grateful for Boeing's presence there, and all the companies, aerospace companies that are present in our county and in our region. And the other thing that's really clear is things like worker availability and mobility and training, education systems. Those are regional and statewide efforts that need to happen, and collaborations that need to happen amongst all of us to really go to the next level and provide what these companies need for the future. So anyway, great job. All right. I think that gets us to the end of our agenda. Our next meeting is July 26th right here. And does anybody have anything else for the good of the order? No August meeting. Yes, thank you. All right, we are adjourned.